Hello and welcome. My name is Brian Caplen. I'm the editor of The Banker. I'm here with James King. He's the Middle East and African editor. And we're talking about the African Regional Conference in Ivory Coast later this year. So James, what is the economic outlook for Africa looking like at the moment?
Well, it's been a very difficult period for most of the big hitting economies in Africa over the last couple of years, in part thanks to the slowdown in the commodity price cycle. We're seeing the economies like Angola, Nigeria and South Africa really decelerate from quite historic highs.
Because they had to adjust all their budgets because of the oil price falls.
Exactly, that's right. So the World Bank expects economic growth for the region as a whole to be 1.5% in 2016, so really quite low. Although they do expect it to slowly accelerate this year to about 2.9% for the year as a whole, and that's off the back of some of these reform measures being put into place, so investments in infrastructure, the growth of the services sector, and a growing middle class across the continent, which is driving some of that non-oil, non-commodity growth for the region as a whole.
Okay, so I mean, obviously you mentioned the challenge of the commodity prices, but what other challenges does Africa face at the moment?
Well, one of the big topics at ARC this year will be the issue of de-risking. So we're seeing a lot of termination of correspondent banking relationships across the continent, which is having a big impact to some extent on economic growth in some of these economies. So, for example, we've seen about a 10% reduction in correspondent banking relationships with South Africa, 16% in Mauritius, and about 37% in Angola between 2013 and 2015. So it's obviously a fairly serious trend and one that's really hitting growth for the region as a whole.
And can African banks do anything to try and prevent this, or are they just stuck?
Well, efforts taking place now really are centered upon sort of capacity raising or for local domestic regulators and banks. So relationships between international banks and regulators really trying to build up their ability to meet these stringent AML, CFT requirements. And that's something that's going to take some time to really deliver before any change is really felt on the ground.
Okay, now we're hearing a lot about cybersecurity everywhere. How is it a problem or an issue in Africa particularly?
Well, it's actually a growing issue because obviously the continent is becoming increasingly connected to the internet. There's a rising middle class, and this is all meaning that there's much more business transactions are being conducted online, and this obviously means an increasingly connected and digitally savvy customer base for African banks as well. It's estimated that South Africa lost about 1 billion rand to cybercrime last year in 2016. So it's a growing problem, and it's one that the banks must address quickly.
James, have a great conference. We look forward to hearing your reports.
Thanks, Brian.